Sports Newsmaker Saturday starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Saturday. We kick off 2019 in a big way, kicking off with one of the biggest stories, actually, of 2018. The retirement of one-term Senator Jeff Flake. 6 terms in the House of Representatives, 12 years there, elected to the U.S. Senate in 2012, and most people thought he would be there a long time. Something happened along the way, or should I say someone. Someone by the name of Donald J. Trump. Let's get started. Retiring Senator Jeff Flake is my guest on Newsmaker Saturday. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me on.
How does it feel to not have to go back anymore?
You know, it's been a great run. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Yeah, not to have to get on a plane, 30-some weeks of the year will be great. That'll be great.
Did your career outstrip your own expectations?
Yeah, you bet. You bet. I never had this grand plan to be in elected office. I always enjoyed public policy. Obviously, the time at the Goldwater Institute, that fulfilled a lot of that. But an opportunity came, and I've enjoyed it all. I've been just extremely honored to represent Arizona. How
long did you plan to go in the U.S. Senate? I said at the outset, I thought you'd be there a long time.
Initially I thought I'd go just a couple of terms in the House.
That's it.
And then, you get there and you realize it's kind of tough to accomplish much in just 6 years. So I stayed 12 in the House, and then I thought 2 terms in the Senate would be good. But then, you face a choice when you're about 60, 62 years old, which I would have been after a second term. Do you finish it off? Do you just run through the tape in the Senate and have that be your whole career, or do you do something afterwards? And if you stay another term and you're close to your late 60s or 70s, and I never, that would have not been good for me.
So I
thought maybe one more term, but not at this cost.
A John McCain type trajectory was not something you ever envisioned?
No, I'm glad John McCain did it. The country, the world benefited significantly from that. And one of the great honors I've had is to serve alongside John McCain. So I'm glad that we got every ounce of service that we did from John McCain. But that wouldn't have been my path. I mean, I have family here. We have other things, church and whatnot, that always I thought that I'd get back to after some service.
Would you say the turning point politically for you in Arizona was not endorsing Donald Trump in 2016?
Well, sure. If I wanted to stay in Washington and just be okay with this president, then yeah. But I mean, this happened long before he was even a candidate. When he in 2012, 2011, I think first, as a citizen, really pushed this birther theory.
Barack Obama.
That Barack Obama was not a citizen of the country. I just thought that was mean-spirited and awful, and I still believe that. I mean, to believe it is bad enough, but I don't think he did. But he knew that some people did, and he could use that to gin up the base, and that's just unseemly. And I thought I could never support him as a candidate. Then when he became a candidate, the things he said about Mexicans, the things he said about John McCain, it was just I could have never supported him.
When the Access Hollywood tape came out,
right,
you called for him to step out of the race.
Yes.
He never forgave you for it.
Yeah, he didn't. But long before that, I'd probably said enough. I mean, when I confronted him about John McCain and those statements, and the comments about Mexican rapists and whatnot, that probably would have been enough before the Access Hollywood. But certainly that was enough.
Tell me about your shopping trip to Home Depot in October 2017. You got a phone call.
Yeah, well, I was planning to run for re-election. I had hoped that the situation could change. I got a call from my campaign team. They'd just been in the field again. I thought all along that the voters could still appreciate somebody who didn't feel like the president did, who had a different vision of where the Republican Party ought to be or what conservatism means. But it was clear by that time and certainly with our last round of polling, that Republican primary voters who before, when you asked them, what is your most important issue, they'd have, jobs or the economy, sometimes immigration, but it had become what they wanted to know is, are you with the president? Are you with Trump? And I'm not. There are some of his policies that I agree with. There are some that I don't.
You voted with him a lot.
And yeah, I'm a conservative. And a lot of the things were like, for example, to repeal Obamacare.
Right.
I'd voted that way 35 times.
I was going to say 30
before the president came along, but all of a sudden it comes and people say, well, you're voting with Trump. No, I'm voting on something that we've voted before. The president happens to agree with it. But I'm a conservative. Some people forget that if you oppose the president. But there are some things that I disagree completely. His stance on trade, the role of American leadership in the world.
What about taking on China? I mean, this is something in terms of ripping us off on intellectual property that needs to be done.
It does, but it ought to be done through the organizations that we have and with our allies on our side.
But people say that those groups are not getting it done, that somebody needed to come in hard on this.
They can, but the problem is now we have lost a considerable number of trade deals that we've had, particularly in the ag sector, that we may not get back. Once China starts sourcing soybeans, for example, out of Brazil, are they going to come back to us later? So we have really done some damage, I think, for the long term. And in particular, what countries would now sign a trade deal with us, knowing that we might just get out of it a year later or a month later? So we have to be a reliable trade partner, and that's certainly not the case now.
It's so interesting because I did not think that the fall in terms of your polling would happen so precipitously. You got down to 26% favorability. You were angering people on the left and on the right.
And that's the thing. If on the left, if you're a conservative and you still vote conservative on tax policy, on health care, they say, well, you'll never be, liberal enough for us. And so
you were in no man's land.
And that's really part of the problem that we've come to in the Senate in particular. Trump has kind of taken all the nuance out of politics. It's not just Trump, but the situation now. If you are a member of the Senate who says, I might be influenced by a hearing that we're having or an investigation that's occurring, and so I'm going to, keep my powder dry on this vote until then or whatever, then you anger both sides. And most members will say, I'm going to make a calculation. I only want to anger one side. And that has led, and really contributed to the polarization that we have now. It's rare on a big issue, whether it's guns or climate or Kavanaugh or anything like that.
We're going to get to that.
Where you have people who are saying, I'm going to let this hearing that we're having inform my vote or my position. Now, almost everybody now will take a side at the beginning, so they only anger one side. And
this is broken down. This is broken down in the U.S. Senate, which is supposed to be the more deliberative body.
Exactly. Where the Senate has always been known as the world's most deliberative body.
Right.
We're a long way from that right now. February of 1990.
Okay, you get on the floor. This is not long after the polling came back from your people in the field. Let me play this. This is when you announced that you were not going to run.
We must never adjust to the present coarseness of our national dialogue with the tone set at the top. The personal attacks, the threats against principles, freedoms and institution, the flagrant disregard for truth and decency. None of these appalling features of our current politics should ever be regarded as normal. We must never allow ourselves to lapse into thinking that that is just the way things are now.
You said more. You said we pretended that the emperor wasn't naked. Even worse, we checked our critical faculties at the door and pretended that the emperor was making sense. Right. I don't know how much more direct you could get to Donald Trump.
It needed to be said. And that's my real concern about where we go as a country and certainly as a party, the Republican Party that has been my home my entire political life.
Is it still?
Yeah, it is. It is, because I think we'll come back. We have to. We have no choice. For whatever reason, in this country, we have given ourselves two political parties. And both of those political parties need to be sane. They need to be rational. And right now, one of those parties, my party, has given to conspiracy theories and to untruths and to anger and resentment that really you can't govern with. And so at some point we'll have to be back. But what I was trying to point out in that speech is that we as Republicans should never regard this current situation that we're in as normal. Because if we do, then we are writing ourselves off in a political world for the future. I mean, you just cannot govern in anger and resentment. That's the main thing.
Let me read off a few of the president's accomplishments. 4 million jobs created since the election. Black and Hispanic unemployment at historic lows. More Americans employed now than ever in recorded history. 400,000 manufacturing jobs back since the election. 3.9 million Americans lifted off of food stamps. Confirmed 2 Supreme Court justices, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. I don't know how you felt about that one, but moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. These are things, I thought that this was what you guys were waiting for. Somebody to come in and actually make stuff happen.
Well, this notion that tax policy, regulatory policy, more conducive regulatory policy, which has really been at the heart, I think, of this economic boom that we've seen in the last couple of years, could have happened under any Republican president without the anti-trade rhetoric and policy that I think for the long term is really, really going to hurt us. So, and a lot of this was generated by Congress. The tax bill was really written in the House and in the Senate, not in the White House. Healthcare policy, some of those things, I give the president credit for pushing some of the deregulation and whatnot that has aided the economy. But a lot of this was done by Congress.
What I'm getting at is can you make an analogy that playing for Bobby Knight, playing for Bill Belichick, it's not pleasant. The players don't love these guys, but they're racking up W's. Is that, at some point, do people say, hey, I'm not crazy about the head coach, but I like the result?
Well, if somebody's looking at one season, but fortunately for all of us, this is a long-term game that we're playing. And our country has survived as it has because we have good, strong political institutions that basically put guardrails around certain individuals or movements. And I think for the long term, the political culture, the coarsening of the political culture is very dangerous.
So it's style, not results as much?
It's more than just style, but style is a big part of it. The name calling, just the vitriol, calling your opponents clowns and losers, assuming that everything we do, whether it's in trade or the economy, is a zero-sum game. Somebody wins, somebody loses, instead of both parties benefiting or all parties benefiting. That has long-term implications, and in particular, in our place in the world. You know, I mentioned in my farewell speech in the Senate the time I spent in Southern Africa and how...
In your mission, during your mission?
During my mission, and then afterwards, 7 years later in Namibia, when I ran a political foundation there.
Right.
And watching a country being born, basically to be there, it's every political junkie's dream to be there when a country is, has its first elections, writes its constitution. At that time, the Berlin Wall had just come down, and we were basically the only game in town, the United States. We were the lone superpower, and every country modeled its constitutions, if they were writing one, on us, on our system. We were the model. That no longer is the case. There are other viable choices, not good choices, but viable choices for countries that are going through transitions. And if we no longer hold ourselves up, to the values that we have really espoused since World War II and have led the world with, then we're in for a bad spell worldwide. And that comes back to affect us, not just in terms of terrorist threats or whatever else, rogue states doing this or that, but with our economy as well.
Or finding allies when we need them.
Exactly. So those things matter. And that may not matter if you're wanting to chalk up wins in one season. But boy, we have a lot of seasons still to go.
Let's talk about the next political season. Would you consider challenging Donald Trump in a primary?
You know, I don't want to.
I'm hearing so many mixed messages on this. Some days I hear you say, well, I haven't shut the door, and other days I hear you say, no, I'm not entertaining it anymore.
Well, that's pretty accurate.
Does it depend on which side of the bed you wake up on?
You know, I've consistently said that I hope that some Republican does challenge him. I think there are others far more willing than I am. John Kasich seems to be out there testing the water.
Right?
It looks like it. And he's a good man, and was a good governor. And his policies and his style is much closer to what I think the Republican Party needs. But somebody needs to go out and challenge the president to talk about what, in my case, what a conservative does. What conservatism really means.
Do you think he can change? Do you believe that he could kind of alter course and maybe that wouldn't be a wise strategy? I don't know.
I have a hard time thinking, somebody 72 years old now that has really kept, a lot of the style and rhetoric and beliefs. It's tough to change at 72. I don't think that that's going to happen. So I'm very concerned about where we are as a party. The midterm elections, because the Republicans kept the Senate, I think people look and say, hey, everything's fine.
Complacency.
When the Senate map was so favorable, it was almost impossible to lose the Senate. But I think what happened in the House should be a real wake-up call.
Alarm bells.
Oh, my goodness. When there are no more Republicans in Orange County, California, you got a problem.
When we come back, Senator Flake gets in the middle of a national firestorm over the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court. When we continue with retired Senator Jeff Flake on Newsmaker Saturday. Back in a minute. Back on Newsmaker Saturday, retired Senator Jeff Flake, my guest. Happy birthday, by the way. You turned 56 this week?
Thanks for the reminder.
I got a couple of years on you.
This week. Yeah.
So you would not have, other than one more term in the Senate, that would have been it. Because I heard Orrin Hatch say that same thing.
People always change their mind. Perhaps I would have, but I don't think so.
That would have been enough.
Yeah, I wanted a life after the Senate.
What is the next chapter?
I'll stay involved, certainly. I love public policy. I like some aspects of politics. I think the fever needs to cool just a bit, but I'll stay involved in a number of ways.
I have to say, you have always been incredibly gracious, very decent person. Is politics too rough and tumble for your blood?
Oh, right now it kind of is. I mean, I sometimes at least, I'm not sure there's room in the current Republican Party for a Republican like me. You
talked about that the party kind of left you.
I think so. I mean, I think with the president's election, we've kind of given sway to, kind of anger and resentment that just have never been my style.
I want to talk about the Brett Kavanaugh nomination because that turned into a very ugly, ugly chapter. You're heading back to your office one day, and two women stop you in an elevator. Let me show that tape. It's worth seeing again.
On Monday, I stood in front of your office. On Monday, I stood in front of your office with Addie Barkan. I told the story of my sexual assault. I told it because I recognized in Dr. Ford's story that she's telling the truth. What you are doing is allowing someone who actually violated a woman to sit in the Supreme Court.
Look at me when I'm talking to you. You're telling me that my assault doesn't matter. That what happened to me doesn't matter. And that you're gonna let people who do these things into power. That's what you're telling me when you vote for him.
Did that change your mind that moment?
I had just announced that I would support his nomination in the committee, and I was going to the committee room when this encounter happened. I knew that the country was unsettled. I was unsettled.
Was that a setup in the elevator?
But it was, no, I don't think so. I mean, the president was saying later, oh, these are paid actors and whatever else. I don't care whether they were there as activists or whatever. They were genuine. And I was hearing from them some of the same things that I'd heard from just chance encounters, with others on the street. that week, every senator was hearing this from friends and family members who we hadn't heard or hadn't thought that they would feel this way, or talking about incidents that they had had. I tell you, it was a real time for the country, and I think we're better because of it.
In the end, you voted yes on Kavanaugh.
What I felt when I went to the committee that day was that the country was unsettled and we hadn't done due diligence here. There was no real good reason why we couldn't have done an FBI investigation. During the old Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill controversy, they were able to do that in 4 days. So I said, let's give it a week. And I felt, and I still feel, that the country is better for it. I think the institution of the Senate is better for it, and the country felt better. I hope we do, about the process. I would have liked to have started that investigation earlier and had it been even more thorough, but I can tell you I do wish, although I don't want to get in the habit of making these background checks public. They need to be private. But I wish the country could have seen what the FBI came back with. I think that the country would feel better about the process and about where we ultimately landed there.
Was she credible?
Yeah, she was. She was. But then when he came on, he sounded like a man that felt that he was unjustly accused as well.
And you think he was?
And I don't think anybody can say with certainty, and when anybody comes and says, I know that she was telling the truth, or somebody says, I know that he was.
Tie base goes to the runner, right? Then it goes to...
Well, yeah. What I felt was that we can't establish a standard where an uncorroborated allegation from 36 years ago in itself can be disqualifying. If we give into that, then what kind of principle do we hold to? And how do you ever have a process that means anything? And so I thought that with the added FBI investigation, we were in a better place.
Let me run a couple of names by you. How will Kyrsten Sinema be as your replacement?
You know, she has been a great representative in the House, and if she does the same thing in the Senate, Arizona will be well served.
What are you most proud of?
I'm Kyrsten.
You know, in the House, certainly working on controlling spending. Back in the House days, it's easy to forget now, but
you're the earmark guy.
We were in the heyday of earmarking, which had become a very wasteful, more important, a corrupting process. A couple of my colleagues went to jail afterwards for this, and to have played a key role in getting rid of earmarks, something I'll always be proud of. And going through 18 years in the Senate without a scandal, or with feeling good, being able to sleep at night, and coming home to a family that still loves you, that's a pretty good accomplishment. In the Senate as well, probably people ask what's your favorite moment, and it was probably flying home from Cuba with Alan Gross, who had been held as a prisoner in Cuba for 5 years, and to be able to play a role in his release, and also the change in policy where we have now diplomatic relations, and far more Cubans are far more independent of their communist government than they would have been before.
I want to wish you the best. I've appreciated the relationship. One more quick one before we go. Does Donald Trump get reelected to a second term?
I have a hard time seeing that. Of course, many of us, including me, were wrong before. But he continues to drill down on a diminishing base. That base is real, and they are strongly supportive, but it's just not big enough. And we saw that in the midterm elections. It's just not big enough. And we should all be grateful for that, because if we had somebody who was reelected, given the kind of the style and the tone and some of the policies, I think the country would be worse off.
Good to see you.
Hey, thank you.
Best of luck. Happy New Year and happy birthday.
Thanks. You've always treated me well.
Arizona Senator retiring Jeff Flake. Back in a minute on Newsmaker Saturday. Thank you. Appreciate it. Special thanks to my guest, retiring Senator Jeff Flake. We'll see you next week on Newsmaker Saturday.